Lucia from Achieving the Dream. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. I'm just going to take a few minutes to explain how to use the GoToWebinar technology. In particular, I'm going to show some of the features that allow us to make our presentation a little bit more interactive. You should be able to see the control panel pictured on your screen right now. If you don't, it's simply because it's been minimized, and you can pull it back out by going to the Grab tab, which hides and shows the control panel. There's also an attendee list where you can see all the participants on today's webinar. If you have a question at any time, you can raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon on the control panel, and I can go ahead and unmute your line. Another way to participate is through the question pane. You can type your question in the pane directly, and I can read it out to the group or respond privately. All of the panes can be expanded or minimized by clicking on the plus or minus button that are at the top left of each pane. In the past, we've had some audio trouble, so if for some reason you're having difficulty being heard, you'll want to make sure that you're not muted on your personal phone and that you've entered the audio pin provided to you at the beginning of the call. If that doesn't work, we suggest hanging up and calling back in to be sure to enter the audio pin. So today's webinar will be covering the implementation and outcomes evaluation of the WFSNCC expansion initiative. On today's webinar, we're joined by Ann Pearson, Derek Price, Margaret Sullivan, and Megan Davis Christensen. On ATD side, joined by me, of course, Lucia Mendez, and by Julian Haynes. Just really quickly, today's webinar will really cover the evaluation components, data sources, technical assistance, timeline, and what we'll do is we'll go ahead and leave a few minutes at the end of the webinar to allow for Q&A. If you've noticed, today's webinar is an hour and a half, so we're hoping to really engage in some meaningful conversations around Phase 2 evaluation.
Great. Thank you, Lucia. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We are very delighted to have our panelists to discuss this topic today. I'll just provide very brief introductions to them, and then we'll get going. Ann Pearson is she's a co-principal investigator for the evaluation of the WFSNCC initiative. She's a senior researcher and director of Mathematica's Center for Improving Research Evidence. Dr. Pearson is also an expert in post-secondary education and the school-to-work transition, and has a decade of experience designing approaches to produce and apply evidence to support program improvement. She has many other work experiences, but we are very happy to have Dr. Pearson on the call today. Derek Price is principal owner of DVP-Praxis, LTD, an action-oriented consulting firm focused on higher education and the workforce. His firm specializes in mixed method formative and summative evaluation services to inform implementation and measure impact. Dr. Price is a national leader in strategic thinking for institutional transformation and systems change. He's also a great collaborator with Achieving the Dream, and we're very pleased to have him as part of this initiative, as well as on the phone, as well as on the webinar today. We're also joined by Margaret Sullivan, who's the overall director of the WFSNCC evaluation, and she's a researcher at Mathematica who specializes in evaluations of education initiatives focused on improving academic and employment outcomes for disadvantaged and underrepresented populations. She has particular expertise in community colleges, having recently led evaluations of the Tidewater Tax Grant for the state of Virginia and the STEM Talent Expansion Program for the National Science Foundation. So we are pleased to have Margaret as part of the evaluation team and also to join our call today. And last but not least, we are joined by Megan Davis Christensen. She is the task lead for administrative data collection and technical assistance. I believe many of you on the call have already had one-on-one conversations with Megan and her counterpart, Scott Baumgartner, to learn more about your data capacity and kind of outline some of the next steps with regard to data technical assistance and evaluation. She is a senior program analyst at Mathematica who currently leads teams to collect and process administrative data from entities nationwide for evaluations and other projects in education and labor. Dr. Christensen directed programs in government and politics for the University of Virginia's Center for Politics and served as an employment case manager for the Charlottesville, Virginia Department of Social Services. So we are very pleased to have the depth and breadth of knowledge that these folks have on the call today to talk about the evaluation. And with that, I think I will pass it on to the experts to move this conversation forward.
Thank you, Julian. This is Margaret Sullivan. I just want to confirm that you all can hear me.
Yep, I can hear you.
Great.
Yeah. Raise your hand if you can't, and we'll let you know, Margaret, if we're getting anything on our end.
Great. Well, thank you so much to Julian and to Lucia and everyone else from ATD for organizing this webinar today. I know that the colleges, most of you have already been interacting with Derek and with Megan for various aspects of the evaluation, but it is really important, I think, for us to come together and try to provide you all never too late, I guess, with sort of a broad introduction to the evaluation. And I just wanted to start by thanking everyone for your time and your contributions thus far. I know that you're all busy trying to get your programs in place and really meet the target student populations, and sometimes evaluations are kind of get pushed to the back burner when you have lots of other competing obligations. So we just really want to take the time to acknowledge all the effort you're putting forth to get these programs moving, and try to talk a little bit today about what the evaluation will entail, address any questions or concerns you have in terms of what will be asked of you, and also explain a little bit about how the information gleaned from this will hopefully be beneficial to you all moving forward. So I'm going to start just briefly by talking about the key evaluation components and how they sort of fit together, and then I'll turn it over to some of my colleagues who will talk a little bit more in depth about the different types of data that we'll be collecting to inform these different pieces. So there are three primary components to our evaluation that will together enable us to answer a series of research questions. And these questions will both attempt to describe the implementation of the WFSNCC program as well as outcomes for participants. And first we have the formative evaluation, which Derek Price and his team from DVP-Praxis are leading. And that's really designed to help us describe the program implementation and generate feedback that will ultimately support the summative evaluation, but also generate feedback that will be useful for program improvement down the road. And the research questions for the formative evaluation really fall into two buckets. First, we'll just start by attempting to describe the operational details of program implementation. So within and across colleges, what is actually being done, who is participating in this program, etc. Trying to really understand about, in particular, about the various approaches that colleges are taking to bundling their services to meet student needs. But as well, we will attempt to look at the broader contextual factors that might support or perhaps impede implementation, with particular focus on the institutional culture piece, trying to understand how college cultures are transforming or perhaps not, to meet student needs, and understanding, why that's happening and what that looks like on the ground. And as I mentioned, this formative evaluation piece is really important just to understand what's being done and try to provide feedback to hopefully help programs improve in the future. But the formative piece is really critical to the summative evaluation, which will come later, and that through our early data collection efforts for the formative piece, we'll be able to identify the various services and models and approaches being taken by colleges to then focus, sort of inform our study design and really focus our efforts for the summative evaluation. So we can design an evaluation that tries to sort of pull in some of that data and really really tell us something about not only what the outcomes are for students overall, but also by different program components or different types of colleges. And then I don't want to overlook the technical assistance, because that piece is extremely important as well to the evaluation. And so as Julian mentioned, Megan Davis-Christensen and also our colleague Scott Baumgardner at Mathematica have already been in touch with colleges and will continue to work with you on an ongoing basis to ask questions about your current capacity to build data and try to then target assistance to help colleges build capacity to collect the data needed for the evaluation, but also just to hopefully build some best practices for tracking service receipt and collecting some of those administrative records moving forward. So right now, I know that you all probably know a bit more about the formative and the technical assistance that, again, will ultimately lead to, and we'll build on that for the summative evaluation down the road, so we can really try to say something about what the outcomes are for this program and whether or not they're actually successful in achieving the, the targeted goals for the for the students who are participating. So with that, if we could go to the next slide, I want to turn it over to Derek, who will provide you an overview of the different types of data sources that we'll be collecting for the formative evaluation.
Thanks, Margaret. I appreciate the handoff. And good afternoon and good morning to all of you who are on the call and on the webinar today. I've met many of you, I'm sure, at some point in time, either through Achieving the Dream or perhaps through the early implementation evaluation efforts that preceded this particular evaluation we're discussing today. My team was also the early implementation evaluators, and we provided some assistance working with the colleges around logic models. We also reviewed implementation plans and provided some readiness assessments to Achieving the Dream that I believe were used to provide feedback to the colleges as you finalize your implementation plans. And those documents that you developed to guide the work that you're doing really are important, and they help frame up our implementation and our formative evaluation efforts. And so we'll continue to reuse those as reference points, but also use reviews of other documents that you submit, such as your first-year annual reports that I believe all of you have now submitted. And so that becomes really good context for us and helps hopefully us be a little bit smarter and a little bit sharper when we do ask for your time to help collect data more directly. So I'd like to spend a couple of minutes letting you know about the ways that we will be engaging the colleges during our formative work. I think there's some time a little bit later in the evaluation where we can talk about the timeline. I may be a little bit redundant now, but I think that's okay. The very first thing that we're doing is conducting telephone interviews. We're doing that with the Achieving the Dream facilitators, as well as with the college leads and state leads. I believe there are a couple of facilitators on the line, and hopefully most, if not all, of the college leads, or at least a representative, is on the line. In fact, some of you may have already been connected and reached out to by part of the formative team. Other members of our team are Priya Chaplot, Leah Childress, and Brandon Roberts, and Jessa Valentine. And I believe that Priya and perhaps Brandon have been scheduling some of these earlier interviews with some of you now. And if you haven't heard from us, you're likely to hear from us, well, you will hear from us by the end of next week. And these interviews will be scheduled over the next several weeks. And of course, we'll do our very, very best to work around your busy schedules. But do try to be responsive if you hear from us, and we'll try to be as least invasive as possible, because we know how much demand is being placed on your time. But telephone interviews clearly are one of our key early formative data sources. As we move further in the evaluation, we will do more in-depth formative data collection. That will include site visits to a select number of colleges. The current target now is to have 8 colleges in which we do more in-depth formative evaluation efforts, and we would visit those colleges twice during the next 2 years of the initiative. Those colleges have not been identified yet. We don't know all of the parameters that will inform that identification. We know that some of our formative data collection through these early telephone interviews, as well as our review of your implementation plans and annual reports, will certainly play into the selection of colleges. But I imagine there will also be various interests of the funding collaborative that's involved in this that will also be taken into account. But we certainly will, at our very best, try to be transparent about why we are selecting the colleges and what diversity that represents in our selection of colleges. So site visits over the next 2 years will be an important formative data source. If we do visit your college, we'll of course conduct interviews with administrators, faculty, staff, community partners, and other important folks involved in the work. We'll likely spend a day and a half or so on the ground, maybe 2, and we'll want to hopefully conduct some student focus groups for students who are reaping the benefits of your programming. If we are not going to visit your college, we will still be engaging with you, but that engagement will likely be through telephone interviews. We may choose another method to collect data from colleges that we're not visiting, but as of right now, we're going to stick with qualitative structured interviews via the telephone, and that would likely be with a small group of folks that are involved in the work at your colleges. That way we have an opportunity to continue to touch base with all of the 19 colleges and initiatives, even though we're only going to be able to visit 8 of you in-depthly as based on our current plan approved by the funders. And then lastly, as a formative data source, we're going to be conducting structured observations at the statewide meetings. We know that your state lead, your state partner organization is going to be convening you either independently as a group of colleges in your state or perhaps as part of a pre-existing convening that is already occurring in your state in which you may come in early or have certain set-aside time, etc. And we will send a team to at least once to each state to have some structured observation around that convening. That's very important to help us understand the relationship between the state leads and the colleges, understand the topics that are being prioritized and the way that information is being delivered and utilized and engaged with by the colleges themselves. So those were a quick overview, or at least somewhat quick overview around our formative data sources. And I think I'll kick it back, Margaret, to you, and you'll send us where we need to go.
That sounds great, Derek. And one thing that I realized I didn't include in this presentation, but just wanted to mention when I talked earlier about sort of the the feedback loop with the formative evaluation is that we don't have specific timeline yet, but we are planning on generating a series of annual reports and 1 to 2 topical briefs on various findings that sort of emerge from the formative evaluation. I have not confirmed this 100%, but it is my understanding that at least some of those products will be posted on the website or shared with colleges so that hopefully you can, you don't have to wait till our final report comes out at the end of the study to sort of learn about some of our findings. I can definitely confirm that with the funders, but as of right now, that's my understanding is that those will be available for colleges to read. So with that, I actually would like to turn it over to Megan Davis-Christensen now to talk about our summative data sources. As mentioned at the beginning, Megan is leading the technical assistance effort as well as the actual collection of administrative data sources. And ultimately down the road, Ann Person will be helping to lead that evaluation, but we're still very much at the early stages of working with colleges to identify your capacity to collect some of these data. So Megan, if you could just provide an overview then of our data sources we're hoping to tap into as well as some of the technical assistance efforts, that would be great.
Sure. Please raise your hand if you have trouble hearing me. Hopefully you all can. I'm coming in clearly. I just want to say just a big thank you to the college staff on the call for speaking with Scott and me this spring and then providing us with some really great feedback on the memo that we sent to you on the service data that we would love to collect. We are using that information and working with Ann and Margaret and others on the team to determine the data we'll be including in the full data dictionary. So we're hard at work on that now, and we hope to release that over the next few weeks. Please let us know, however, in the interim if you have any questions or concerns. We're always available and happy to help. So if you look at the first bullet, the data that are internal to the college, that the college have access to, we'll be requesting data from student information systems, things like student background, demographics, course record information. We're hoping to gather some data from your financial aid systems as well. Things like whether students are received a Pell Grant, the number of dependents, things that are related to their financial aid applications mainly. And any supplemental overlay data collection systems. And these, by this, we're really referring to those systems that colleges are using to track mostly the high-touch services that they're providing to students, but they're also using them to track some low-touch services that they're providing. The other data sources that we'll be hoping to access are external to the colleges, and those are data that are under the domain of regional or state administrative agencies, such as state departments of labor or state workforce agencies, or regional or state public benefits or human services agencies, those that oversee public benefits. Those data include quarterly wages, employment status, and benefits data. Those include things like SNAP, TANF, daycare, Medicaid, CHIP, and maybe some other different local like emergency assistance that students may receive. I think we should go to the next slide. Thanks. As most of you know, Scott and I have been reaching out to the colleges this spring to talk about these different administrative data. The research questions that we can answer are very, very much tied to, for the summative evaluation anyway, are very tied to the administrative data that are available that colleges have access to or can gain access to through contracts with regional or state agencies. So we've been reviewing the different data that colleges do have access to so that we can create a reasonable data request that it can also answer some really good research questions. We're working now, as we've discussed on those calls, on our MOU or our data sharing agreement template. We refer to these as memoranda of understanding. We are almost finished with that, and we will be sending that out soon. We need to include the list of data that we'll be requesting in both the MOU template and the IRB application. So once we have the administrative data list finalized, we can drop that into the MOU and the IRBs, and then we're on our way with those. So we are, almost prepared to send you the MOU template and either your college IRB application materials, or we're sending all colleges, regardless of whether they have a formal IRB, we're sending them an IRB master document that describes the study and the different administrative data requested under the summative evaluation component. We've been working with colleges on different challenges that they foresee, and we're happy to advise on moving forward on any questions you might have on the administrative data requested. And then we can also help colleges link data from external sources as well as sources internal to the college, and we've talked to the different staff about that. So if colleges need help linking different data, we can provide that assistance as long as all the files include a unique and consistent student identifier. And then we're really looking forward to supporting colleges building out their data capacity for this evaluation, but in the longer term, once this evaluation is over. I've already talked about the data dictionary, but please, again, reach out to me and Scott at any point in time before or after we do release it if you have any questions about the data we are including. And I also mentioned the service data memo, which we sent out. But we're also working with MDRC on a best practices manual for tracking service data. This is really pertaining to the one-on-one services that are provided. We're almost ready to send that out as well, so you'll be on the lookout for that too. And the next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Margaret.
Thank you, Megan. So we've already touched on sort of throughout the presentation some of the upcoming tasks, but I thought it would be helpful to put everything in one place so that you all can see the timing of activities over the next couple of months and then a bit farther into the future. So starting with 2015, we're already in September, but we have a lot planned in the next couple of months to really get the evaluation moving. As Derek mentioned, right now he is in the process of conducting the initial round of telephone interviews, both with state and college leads and then ATD facilitators. And we are planning right now on wrapping that up by October so that we can get our first memo out sort of with early findings by the end of 2015. And again, that's really important because this is really sort of setting the stage in terms of thinking about how colleges are approaching implementation of the program and priorities and challenges, and just really learning all that we can up front to then think about how to ultimately structure the outcomes analysis down the road. As Megan just mentioned, she and her team are finishing up the data dictionary and working with MDRC to finalize the best practices manual or memo for tracking service receipt, and we hope to get that out by the end of the month, I think, or if possible, early October at the latest. And then sort of ongoing from now to the end of December will be Megan and Scott continuing to work with the colleges on the telephone, over email, just sort of continuing the conversations just to talk about all the different aspects of administrative data collection, both building capacity to track those data, but also executing the necessary MOUs and receiving IRB approval. And that process does look different, for different colleges, and so that's why those conversations will really be customized between now and December to meet the needs of colleges. So once we wrap up those activities, that puts us in a good position starting in 2016 to actually begin to collect and analyze the administrative records that we need for the evaluation, as well as identifying the sites that we will be visiting for the formative evaluation and scheduling those site visits. We haven't exactly identified the month in which we will be visiting you. I'm sure Derek will be speaking with you all about that, timing of that, but the plan is to collect or to conduct one round of visits in each year, as well as at least one observation of a statewide, with the statewide meetings that's already in existence. And our project is slated to wrap up by the end of 2017. So 2016 and 2017 will look similar, and that will be repeating. We'll be asking you for administrative records at several points in time, as well as collecting formative data kind of on an ongoing basis. But once we have a better sense of everyone's capacity to collect the administrative data and we identify the sites for the site visits, we can put together a much more detailed schedule moving forward. I mean, we'll have a better sense of the timing of some of those activities in the out years, and we'll be able to give you all a heads up on when we expect those to occur so you can plan accordingly. That is everything that I have planned, but we wanted to leave a lot of time just in anticipation of there being questions to kind of engage now and just more of an informal conversation, I guess, to talk about some of the pressing issues or concerns that colleges have with respect to what we've discussed today, or just sort of other questions that you haven't been able to raise thus far. So I'll turn it over, I guess, to Julian to see if you want to facilitate. I don't know if you've received any questions thus far over the chat box, or if you just want to facilitate fielding questions now, we're happy to answer them.
Hi everyone. So I guess what we can do, if you'd like to ask the question over your line, if you'll go ahead and just raise your hand, what I'll do is I can unmute your line so that you can ask it out loud. Or if you'd like to chat your question, I can also just read your question out loud to the rest of the group.
So we have a question with regard to, I guess, the number of times that Mathematica will request data submission for the evaluation. I think this kind of in the context of identifying the best way to manage expectations on the campus to notify the correct folks that this process is in place and that we will be requiring to provide Mathematica with this information. So I guess the question is, how many times do they anticipate requesting data for evaluation? Are the number of times they'll make those requests subject to change? And how best can we communicate what the expectations are in order to meet that requirement?
Megan, do you...
We've been talking about this. I know, Julian, we've been discussing this with you, and our team's been talking about this here. And we want to balance burden to the colleges with the needs of the evaluation, and also the needs of the funders for their required reporting. I know, Julian, you and I had discussed, creating unduplicated counts of students and how Mathematica could assist with that. So if we were to assist with something like that, we would need data after each term. We've talked with the colleges about definitely trying to provide data after this fall term, with the objective being to really focus on defining who are the participants. We need to work with each college and across the colleges to come up with some business rules about who the participants are, so that they know for whom data is required. And also, it would be great to receive data on services after this fall term so we can troubleshoot any issues or major gaps with those data, because they're so critical. They're the treatment that we are evaluating for the summative component. And then it would be good, to get a full year next summer, so that we can also look at course record information if that's not provided after this fall term, and really see how the data are coming together for analysis. So I guess the proposed schedule is after each term. I think that makes the most sense, but if colleges feel that that's very burdensome, then we would like to discuss that. So.
And Megan, my understanding is, as of right now, we think our last data request or last term would be spring of 2017.
Correct. Yeah. So we'd like to include any summer or winter terms that you may have, but yeah, so it would go from fall of 2016 through spring of 2017, and include any any winter or summer terms within that span.
So most likely we're looking at four data
collection.
Four data collection points in time, though we can talk with colleges about that.
Yeah, and if if there was some burden, we might be able to revisit maybe one of them, but there would be at least three. And one thing we've been discussing is maybe, because we have a good idea of the course record information that colleges have access to, is pretty standardized across colleges. So we could really just focus this initial data collection, the fall term, on, like I said, defining participants and collecting the service data on those participants and some background and demographic characteristics. I think those would be important too. And then maybe do more of a full data collection at the end of the spring 2016 term, which would include the course record data and then some data from some other systems in the college. But we wouldn't really be looking at the external data sources until we were really sure that the data that the colleges had domain over was in good shape. Some states are a little further ahead in their requests for unemployment insurance records and public benefits information, and we also appreciate that California has some limitations on the student level unemployment insurance data that they're able to collect, and that is that they can't collect it from the state. And I do know, for example, in Virginia, that VCCS automatically will regularly get UI records from the State Department of Labor, BEC, and has those for their students. So, you know, we can sort of address when we get those, you know, longer-term outcomes data with each state, each college as appropriate. So these initial 2 data collections will really focus on the data that the colleges have domain over.
Great. Thank you. So we have another question regarding IRB approval. So the specific question is, can you review the specifics around getting IRB approval for the evaluation?
Yeah.
And follow up to that. So it's a 2-part question. And the follow-up is this something Mathematica handles, or is there a separate proposal needed per institution?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Mathematica, we are applying to our IRB this fall. So we're working on that application right now. So Mathematica reports to an IRB as well. So we'll be applying to our IRB this fall. We are also prepared to apply to each college's institutional review board. And those initial calls that we had this spring, we touched on that. And I think we're in pretty good shape. I think we know which colleges have a formal IRB and have their own application materials, and which colleges either have no IRB or have more of an informal one and no formalized application materials. So we have created, we're just finalizing it now, like what we call a master IRB document, and it has all the information that IRBs like to see. And we'll create that as a PDF that we'll share with all the colleges, regardless of whether they have a formal, informal, or no IRB. And then we will also be filling out the college's required materials, those that have a formal IRB. Now, some colleges require that they have like an internal study sponsor. They have a member of their college faculty or staff that actually is the applicant to their college IRB. On some of these calls, folks weren't sure whether Mathematica needed to be the applicant or like a program lead needed to be the study sponsor or the applicant. So we'll just work with each college and follow whatever guidelines they have. And we're also prepared to you know, follow specific procedures or guidelines that each IRB has. You know, for example, some IRBs won't allow the release of certain personally identifiable information like students' names or social security numbers. And that's fine because we only need some kind of consistent and unique identifier that follows students across the terms. However, if students would like assistance with linking data, some data may use a social security number, for example. That's what unemployment insurance records include, is social security number, name, and date of birth. So if colleges needed assistance, then we would need them to provide social security numbers as well as student's name and college level ID in their college level records. So that's just one example of a policy that an IRB might have that Mathematica would need to follow. I hope that answered your question. If it didn't completely, please also feel free to reach out to me or Scott after this webinar, and we'd be happy to set up a call to discuss any of those details further. I'm not on there, but if you don't have my email, Margaret, I'd be happy to provide it to you.
Sorry, Megan.
This is Lucia. I'll go ahead and in the follow-up email after the webinar, I'll go ahead and include Ann, Derek, Margaret, and Megan's contact information if you have any follow-up questions.
This is Ann. Could I just add a little bit to that question about IRB? In similar projects where I've worked with groups of colleges, we've taken a very similar approach to what Megan just described, where Mathematica applies to its own IRB for the evaluation, but then the colleges themselves may or may not apply for IRB approval with their own college IRBs. And what we found was that oftentimes it's always good to apply to engage IRB, but we found that because the programs that we're studying are part of the normal educational processes of the colleges, oftentimes the IRB will decide that the study is exempt, and so you don't actually need approval per se. What you get is exemption. It ends up being a sort of a lighter touch process. So that's what may actually end up happening. And in fact, I think, I'm just trying to think in my own experience, Derek might also be able to speak to this. I think the majority of cases, the college IRBs decide that the study's exempt.
Yeah, and this is Derek. That's been my experience as well, and that the decision has been as exempt largely for the reason you've just described, which is that the evaluation work and the data is being shared for purposes of internal continuous improvement and to enhance educational outcomes. And for that reason, it really is seen as an internal study and doesn't require the same level of scrutiny.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's my experience too. Thanks for adding that in. So we'll be prepared, to apply and provide the information, but I've found that often IRBs will exempt.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the follow-up on that, Anne. So I actually had a question. I noticed in one of the slides, structured observations was mentioned at some of the state convenings. I know California is meeting in about 2 weeks, and Arkansas and Washington will be convening, as well as Virginia, be convening in October. Can you speak a little bit more about the structured observations and what you as the evaluation team will really be looking for?
Sure, I'll do what I can. That particular set of activities has not been approved for this calendar year, and so we're not attending any of those events that are currently scheduled. So our formative team would not be attending a statewide convening until 2016 at the earliest to do so. As a result of that, we haven't actually developed the protocols and the frameworks for that structured observation. But in essence, what we're doing is we're coming in with a set of concepts and ideas that reflect the goals and outcomes and activities that have been that we've documented to date by the colleges, but also based on our interviews with the state leads, what the state would be doing as well. And we're going in with that information sort of prepared, and we participate really by observation. We're looking and seeing what's going on. We're listening to conversations and presentations, and we're mapping that, what we observe, against what we would have expected to see at these convenings based on what the colleges have said they're going to do and what they hope to achieve, but also based on what the states have said they're going to do to support that effort. And so we will have a framework that we've developed in advance. We just haven't done that yet.
Great. Thank you, Derek, and thank you, Lucia, for the question. I don't believe we have any other questions coming in from the folks on the webinar that we're receiving on our end. But I do want to certainly extend my appreciation to Mathematica and the team for kind of highlighting some of the next steps and expectations for both the formative and the summative evaluation. As you've heard today, Mathematica is wearing, in their collaboration with Derek Price and his team, kind of multiple hats in this work. And I think Megan made the good point earlier. We want to, this is especially the work that she's doing with the data TA, is identifying, kind of meeting the colleges where they are, identifying the capacity that they have for data, the current capacity they have for data collection, and kind of moving forward based on their current capacity versus making requests that perhaps may be unrealistic depending on the capacity for how to move forward. So I think Megan and Scott have done a good job of, I think, identifying the great value that they'll provide the colleges in thinking through data collection, capacity, monitoring, et cetera, not just in preparation for the summative evaluation, but to support the strategy implementation and eventual scaling of this work. So we know that we're throwing a lot at you kind of early and often with this initiative with the overall ambitious timeline, but a lot of it is to support the work versus make demands always on what ATD needs and what our stakeholders need. So I encourage you, if you have any questions about any of this, to contact me directly via phone or email, and I will then identify the appropriate evaluation team member to pass your question along to. But again, you will be meeting with Derek and his team, and continually with Megan and her team. So we hope that through these engagements you will develop an increased level of trust and understanding about what your work is all about, and as it aligns with what their charge is as evaluators. So we sincerely appreciate all the panelists' time today and all the colleges joining us today. This was a request that ATD made, just in the effort of being completely transparent and getting everyone on the same page about what is coming down the pike for evaluation. Knowing that a lot of the great work of the formative evaluation and data TA has started already. So again, if you have questions, please contact me directly. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with and sent out to the entire consortia, especially for those who were not able to register and join us today. So there may be follow-up questions as other folks listen to the webinar. But we don't have any other questions right now. We appreciate you answering the ones that we did have, and thank you for your time today. I think that's it.
Great. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you.
All. And
thanks a bunch.
Have a great weekend.
Take care.
Thanks. And thank you for everyone for joining.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.